The last thing we discussed on Friday was the whole concept of stars, the zodiac, and how all the energies come through the stars and they evolve into the physical world. And those energies which God releases are dependent on what's needed for existence at that particular time in history. The world experiences many types of experiences. Bounty at an unusual level, God forbid, tragedies, whether it's within existence, the wars, the unsettledness, the chaotic state of the world, whether it's disease, pandemic. God determines when it is and when it's not. All these energies go through the stars. As we said, the stars are the mechanism to take something from a spiritual energy level that it should manifest itself in the physical. And that's what we mentioned, that the astrologers of ancient times, by reading the stars, they knew exactly what was happening on the present and what was going to happen in the future. Had nothing to do with prophecy, because the stars already foretold what was coming down the pike, so to say. Now, one of the 13 tenets of Jewish belief is that God communicates with man. Why does one have to believe? And it's a tenet. It's like you have to believe in God. You must believe that God communicates with a human being. Why is that such a basic tenet? Could you imagine the United States government builds a laboratory for trillions of dollars, and you have a person who's totally illiterate, has never seen anything which has any semblance of this in his life, and they say, go in there, figure it out for yourself. Exactly how this very sophisticated, beyond anything that has ever existed, you figure it out, see the way it operates and functions. You say to the person who tells you this, you just invested this unlimited amount of money, and I have a limited IQ. It is impossible to figure it out. A needle in a haystack, where the haystack is all existence, is easy to find and figure out that laboratory based on its sophistication. The world itself borders on the infinite. The components, whether it's species, whether it's inanimate, whether it's just the oceans, dry land, the gases, the galaxies. How do you figure it out? It's beyond the human being's capacity. What is it all about? Well, you'll feel your way through it. If God created an existence, and God is the creator, evidently, if there's a creator, there's a purpose for creation. There's an objective. Unless he tells you what that objective is, humanly, it is impossible to figure out. So how do you know what the objective is, what the purpose is, what every aspect of the existence is all about? So you'd say, well, he endows man with intelligence, superior intelligence. But as superior that intelligence is, you still minimally have to see the light at the end of the tunnel to be able to shed some light on this impossible situation, because it's beyond human grasp, regardless of how endowed you are, intelligently speaking. So so therefore God communicated with the first human being known as Adam, explaining it to him exactly what every aspect of this existence is, what the objective is, and what his input is, and what his output would be. And if he makes the wrong move, how he will destroy this existence, how he'll take it down. He'll be infusing it with some kind of virus, which the virus will cause the world to malfunction. And if he fuses it with something positive, the world advances. And God explained to him every detail of the objective and how it's done. Now God said, it's up to you. But you have an inclination. You're gonna have demons you have to fight. Are you gonna succumb to those inclinations, or you're gonna take control and follow the instructions of the Creator who instructed you exactly how to deal with all these issues? So God communicated with Adam. God communicating with a human being. That's called prophecy. Prophecy has nothing to do with telling the future whatsoever. It's included in that. But that's only in regard to the objective of creation, or where you failed, or to people to succeed. The prophet is given that inside information, how to advise humanity, or the prophet himself, how to advance his own level of spirituality, what to address and what not to address. I'll give you an example. Lavdil. Rabbi Pinto, I have a very close relationship with him for many years, going close to 40 years. And very often I would say to him, what do you think I have to work on? What's my next step? So he used to say to me, every time I come, I'll tell you what you should work on and what you should focus on. Because he's endowed with a certain ability and a sense of evaluation, spiritually speaking. Very often we'd have these conversations.
I think it's okay.
And he would tell me certain things. Sometimes I'd say, why? I think I'm okay in that area. And he would say whatever he would say, whether yes, no, whether I accept it, didn't, that's not the issue. The issue is, I asked him to advise me. If he noticed something, a shortcoming, or something that could be done better, I want him to point it out to me. That's what I would ask him very often. I haven't done it for years with him. Now he asks me to point out what he could improve. He says, he used to bring a guy, his name was Eliezer Shmario. I haven't seen him in years. Where is he? He wrote an article one time about a certain story. I want to advise him again. He pointed, that's my shortcoming. One day, bring him in. Larry, I don't see your smile. Okay. But that's why prophecy, God communicated with man, is a fundamental of existence. Because there is no way, logically speaking, that God could create a world with a purpose, with an objective, unless he communicated that objective to the human being. So prophecy is God communicating with man. That's what prophecy is. Nothing more than that, nothing less than that. Now the question is, a human being, to qualify to be the receptor for that communication, what level do you have to be at? A person is an ogre, uncouth, a physical mass, a hedonist, has no relevance to spirituality. As they say in English, there's nobody to talk to. The person God communicates with is a person who every aspect of his life has been fully invested in spirituality. That's the only person God communicates with. If you take a look in Rambam, Maimonides, in the fundamentals of Torah, when he speaks about a prophet, to be qualified to be a prophet, that means every moment, waking moment of your existence, your mind is never occupied in anything but issues of spirituality. You have to achieve that level. You realize a prophet doesn't become a prophet when he's born. That means through multiple, endless choices and advancements of one's growth in spirituality, you become that receptacle. And once you're that qualified receptacle, then God will communicate with that person. If God is communicating. At times, God will communicate with a prophet once in a lifetime. And what is the extent of that communication? It could be a nanosecond. But that nanosecond will change that person's life, give the person an insight that takes 100 years to amass that level of understanding, and it goes beyond that. Why? Because the concept of time is finite. When God communicates with a human being, you're out of the realm of your physicality. God communicates with the soul. The human faculty, the brain, the neurological system has nothing to do, or the chemical activity in the brain has nothing to do with understanding or relevance to this communication. The essence of the human being, which is eternal, is what we call the neshama, the soul. He hooks into the soul. That's the communication. So if the soul is sufficiently spiritualized and advanced due to many positive choices that the human being made up to that point, and there's no level of distraction, not for a moment, the person's mind is fully occupied only with God's will, that person qualifies to be the prophet. But prophecy is something where God communicates with the human being. So logically, that tenet that God communicates with man, if you believe the world is not random, if you believe the world's random, there's no creator. No creator, there's no basis even to believe in prophecy. But if you believe that there is a God and God created, he created for a purpose. The Ramchal writes, Rabbi Luzzatto writes in The Path of the Just, as there's an expression, life's not a bowl of cherries. That's not his words. He says there's no human being that whose life is perfect. At times in life, we suffer very painful moments. We have disappointments. We have our peaks, we have our valleys. We have moments we don't even understand where we're going. And sometimes they're traumatic, those moments. If that is the case, especially if you lived in, historically speaking, times where the average person was the subject of a monarch, you had no rights. You were like the equivalent of a serf. And you had disease, and you had plague. You ask yourself a question: what's this all about? Does it make sense if you believe in the Creator that God created man to suffer? That man should have a good time. You should go to Canyon Ranch and eat grass for 2 weeks. Is that what it's all about? And come back with that made in Italy polo shirt, made in Italy, with a little bag made of synthetic fiber, because you don't want to pollute the environment. Is that what life's all about? So Rabbi Luzzatto says, logically speaking, if you say the world is random, there's nothing to talk about. We don't begin the conversation. But if you believe that there is a God, meaning there's a creator, and the creator created for a purpose, there's no way you could lose yourself that the purpose is that man should live high on the hog. Because nobody lives high on the hog. And even if you live high on the hog, it doesn't last very long. And even if it does, there's no sense of being content. Eventually, you feel empty and you feel life has no value. Because as much as you have, you always want more. And if you can't satisfy the more, what happens? It leads to depression. That's what it leads to. If that's the case, life has to be more than indulging in the material and expanding the material. Must be more than that. I remember the World's Fair in the early 60s. And I'm sure you all went there because you're both young enough to have been there. And they had a telephone booth where the future, when you speak to a person, you'd be able to see the person. That appliances, they're made by General Electric, appliances of the future. And you have the Greyhound little carts running around the area, go Greyhound, with that music. You heard it continuously. This is the future. Do you know what it means? Now it takes 8 hours to clean a house, you could do it in 2 hours. They didn't tell you what you do with the remainder of the time. There used to be a 40-week work week, 50. Today you only have to work 20 hours. Now what do you do with the rest of the time? Whittle it away, go back to the trough, to the feed bag, and get yourself sick. Well, they said, in the Orient, in Japan, people used to never were subject to stomach cancer. Once they took on the American diet, all of a sudden they're subject to certain diseases that they were never subject to. There's a new type of food. It's called plant-based, who knows what. If you want to be healthier, you can be healthy by eating normal. The question is, what's normal? A person walks down the street and he has all these tics. His face goes in every direction. They say, what's the problem? Well, I'm on 16 different kinds of medication. Depression medication, focus medication, blood pressure. And by the way, I even have a certain oxygen under my shirt that goes into my neck, so I should be able to breathe. So I should be brain deprived of oxygen. You understand? And you expect this person to walk a straight line. But you want to know? So what's normal? The average person's walking down the street. That's what he looks like. That's called normal. But what's normal, what's supposed to be, is what God says is normal. What's balanced? Years ago, if you went to a fruit and vegetable store and you'd order and you buy fruit, vegetables, you had a scale that hung on a chain. And the fruit vendor, he put it in a brown bag and he put it on the scale. And the scale had to stop shaking before you could get a semi-accurate weight. And very often, not only did he not wait for it to stop, he had his hand in the bag when he took the weight. That's the way he used to do it. And he had the pencil behind his ear and he would put it on that paper bag. And then he'd add it up. And if you didn't check his math, he overcharged you $3. Well, $3 was a week's wage. Instead, that's what it used to be. This used to be the reality. What about if you have to, then they came out with electric scales, Hobart scales, electric scales. The question is that you have to set the weight, the scale, to be accurate. What about you set the scale, it's always 6 ounces over. Meaning he's always overcharging you. You say, well, that's normal. That's the way that Hobart sets the scales, because they want to increase their sales. So the buyer should want to buy it. Their scales, they charge the customer they give you 6 ounces more weight, they're giving you 6 ounces less. But that's normal. Got it? That's called weight. That's called honest weights and measures. In our society, what is ethical, moral, normal? What is? What's above reproach? It depends what is the baseline. If God doesn't give you the baseline, being inclined to satisfy our desires and animalistic desires, there's no picture we can't paint which becomes our own reality. That is a reality. And people become convinced. As long as you're on top of the mountain, you're convinced. If you're subject to the brunt of what that is, and the pain becomes intolerable, you say, what's going on? Sure. The ones who run the movement, they're espousing whatever that may be, because everybody else is a victim. It's not like parasites. Society are the victims of that parasite behavior and the hoodwinking everybody. So what is life? So why do people get it? You know why they don't get it? And the Mesilas Yesharim says it, Rabbi Luzzatto, Path of the Just. Most people, and I said this many years ago, how do they occupy themselves? How many people come home at night and just have a peaceful, quiet night? They always have to say, so what are we doing? You know why? Because people live lives of distraction. Because if they never stop for a moment and look themselves in the mirror, and these questions naturally come to the surface. What's it all about? where am I going in life? But if it's always where we're going, theater, restaurant, hiking, vacation, this, that, clothing, that's what life is full of. You don't have a moment to step back and reflect and say, and take an assessment of what's going on, where you've been. The person wakes up at the age of 55, a woman, and she's not married. She's had a great time all along. But where's her life gone? It feels literally like a piece of garbage. Like garbage. And when I'm saying that word, many years ago, I had a certain student. She's became a Baldas Tshuva. She was a bankruptcy lawyer. And she brought a friend to the class. And I remember her name. Never saw her before. And she says to me, you know, we feel inferior. Women, what do we feel inferior? I say, you're at fault. You're at fault. Why are you at fault? She was also a lawyer. I said, you know why you're at fault? Because when you go out with a man and he makes certain advances at you, and you offer yourself sexually, and you allow yourself to have a relationship with him, when he's not interested, he throws you out. He goes on to the next woman. So what is your value? If you're for the taking, because every woman wants the man, so because you compromised on your value, therefore you have no value in society. Well, I'm an executive, but after you finish with an executive and you got your check, sometimes you'll even pick up the tab for the person who abuses you. Well, it's not abuse. We had a great time of vacation. What about when vacation is a sad memory of the past? And now the person's vacation with someone else, and you're at home just soaking in your solitude. How do you feel? If you would realize or recognize your value and not compromise and meet the objective of who you are, you'd have a spouse. You'd have children. Now when you're 45, 50 years old, now all of a sudden you're waking up. Where have I been? People are too busy to think. Life, there's too much fun in life to stop and think and become too serious. It's not simple to be serious. To succeed in anything, even let's talk about an education. Everybody wants to succeed to maximize on salary. So education, you'd say, almost is forced. Because if you want to succeed financially, you have to go to school. You have to apply yourself. But outside of that, people believe once you have that buck, there's nothing you can't buck. That's what people believe. Big mistake. At the end, you get bucked. That's what happens. And what does the person feel like? He looks for scapegoats. It's my mother, it's my father, it's my friend, it's my boyfriend. And at the end, you know who it is? It's God. God's at fault. Because one that come to the realization when I was 21 years old. It's the rabbi. If the rabbi would have closed the parking lot on Saturday, on Shabbat, and would have taught us not talk about current events, he would have taught about Judaism, maybe I would have seen my life differently. And that's the reality. Today, Jews have strayed to such a degree, they don't even have a sense of the Jewishness, period. Then I'm going back now, 30 years ago, people still felt Jewish. And they wanted to marry a Jewish man. If they couldn't find it, God forbid, maybe they'd end up with a non-Jew. But their first choice and priority is a Jewish man because they felt Jewish. Their grandmother would be very disappointed. Their parents would be disappointed. Whatever it was. Today, we've become so detached. The Jewish identity has literally vaporized. There's barely a trace by, I'd say, a very significant part of the secular population of Jews. No sense. They're not affiliated, period. Jew, non-Jew. Same. Tattoo. A's tattooed, B's tattooed. You're like amazed. What's going on? Because if you have no understand what the objective of creation is, that you have a value as a human being, You believe in God and he put you here for a reason. And you start doing your analysis. Person's an analyst in Wall Street. He's a phenomenal analyst. Why don't you do an analysis on your own life? What's it all about? Doesn't make sense. The answer is you're too distracted. You're too distracted in your success. And people should acknowledge you. People pay attention to you. To acknowledge who you are and what your value is. To come upon these truths. But people never, unfortunately, don't come upon these truths. Years ago, I said if a person would take a time machine from the 50s to the 80s, they said the world went mad. That's what a person would say. But since time is so gradual, time passes very quickly. But the way we experience time at the moment, the changes are so gradual, we don't even understand where we were and where we're going. Therefore, we don't feel the change as being drastic. But if you go from 50 to the mid 80s and you come into this world, you say this world is, the word chaotic or mad is an understatement of the reality. What it is, the level of conservatism, ethics, morals, they were so tight. Work ethic had a value. It wasn't because how much money you made necessarily. You didn't produce a shoddy product. You prided yourself in something being quality and genuine. Made in USA years ago was the pride of the United States. It was genuine. It was quality. A human being, an American, was a quality human being. Ethics, morals, giving. You were proud. That was the patriotism. It's what this country stood for. Freedom. That today doesn't exist. But if you saw what it was, and you have any recall of that, what it was and what it's today, the span of 60 years, it's not to be believed. Comparing it from then to now, but who has that ability of comparison? If a person was born in the 80s, 90s, you never saw what was, maybe you read about it, but it's like reading about what happened at the time of the Civil War. It has no relevance to their lives. They don't have the capacity even to process and to internalize and to be touched by that, because there are no role models of what that representation is. And if there is, they say this man is an archaic human being. It's something of the past that has no relevance to the present. We're trying to change that. We don't want that. I remember many years ago, a school teacher, public school teacher, very many of the women were women. Some of them were like spinsters, but they were very straight-laced. They had a representation of order, responsible men too, men teachers, public schools. How did I experience public school teachers? Because in the yeshivas, in the second department of yeshiva, English started at 2:00. So we would receive all the quality public school teachers. Hebrew studies were from 9 to 1. We had an hour break. 2:00 started secular studies from 2 to 6. This was 5 days a week. That's what it was. So I remember we had quality, first class, secular education in the yeshiva. All of a sudden, many years later, after I used to visit New York, you see the teacher leading his kids in the street. The teacher is walking with torn jeans at the knees. This is the role model for these kids, yeah? This is the Pied Piper leading them straight into not into the river, into the sewer. This is a role model, what this person looked like. This is literally brainwashing children, that this is supposed to be what it's all about. And as time went on, it even became worse. No role models anymore. You don't even know what a role model is, what an appropriate role model is. What's ethical? What's moral? What's normal? What used to be normal was no longer normal. But if you believe in God, and God he's the creator, and the creator, if he created, he had an objective to create. What did he create? For what purpose did he create? And that's Rabbi Luzzatto in The Path of the Just. To create that people should suffer, that people should be discriminated against, that people should be under the heels of monarchs. That's not a purpose. No way. And anybody who tries to convince you that, the person's either a fool or the person has no choice but to accept it. Because you get the brunt of that monarch's law. But the person has to make some semblance of sense of what does exist. And what was it? The semblance was not semblance, it was. Purpose of existence is not for the material. It's despite the challenges, God is testing you. Do you believe in him? Do you believe that ultimately this has purpose and has value? It doesn't shake your faith. The Jew in Europe, we were in Poland for 1,000 years. During that period of time, most of the time, there was very extreme levels of anti-Semitism, especially in Poland. In the Bavarian states, where they had the vassal kingdoms, where the Jews were always pogroms, because the Germans, they were always anti-Semitic. And the Jews, the value was they used to tax the life out of them. But yet, when it came to the Shabbat, regardless of what the Jew was during the week, the Jew was like a prince in his own home. He celebrated the Shabbat. He would save all week that meal on the Shabbat should be a special meal. He had special Sabbath clothing. It was a different reality. What about the week? What about the monarch? What about the king? What was irrelevant? The Jew hooked into his little private chamber. Today it's God's day. Today I'm a prince because I'm a prince all week. What the world recognizes, doesn't recognize is irrelevant to me. I know who I am. We're princes, it's like a king in exile. That's what the Jews are. We're princes in exile. But who caused it? We messed up. We allowed certain foreign elements to come into our lives. Therefore, we're princes in exile. That's the background. That's the history. We just finished commemorating the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. 2 temples were destroyed on the same day. Why did God destroy them? And we were sent into exile. The second exile is the Roman exile. It's 2,000 years. Is it because we had such exceptional level of behavior? It was God was only willing to tolerate our misbehavior up to a point. After that, God said, I had enough. You got to learn the hard way. Evidently, we still haven't learned. Haven't learned. America. The streets are paved with gold. Thank God. After World War II, the economic status of the Jew has been exceptional. United States, it's not that long. The Holocaust survivors came over after the war, 47, 48. Education was available. And Jewish parents always wanted their children to be educated. They reestablished all the educational institutions, whether it was Hebrew studies, secular studies, it was there. But how long has it been? If you look at this, the line of history, the majority of the time since the destruction of the temple, life has been worse than hell. The way the Jew was, the Holocaust, the level of genocide, the level of cruelty, even World War I, the Russian Revolution, what happened to what Stalin did to the Jews, what Lenin and Trotsky did to the Jews. Religion, either you were killed or you were sent to Siberia. The Middle Ages was disastrous. The Jews never had a good day in their lives, but yet they toed the line. Why? Because the Jew always had a recognition. As painful it is, I know who I am. I know I am. Things, unfortunately, today in the world are turning. The golden age of the United States for the Jew, the anti-Semitic incidents in this past year was quadrupled from the previous year. And it's starting to rear its head. And God forbid, in a moment, especially we have communication is instantaneous with the internet. God forbid, you never know in a moment what could happen. But we feel secure. I'm not saying you shouldn't feel secure, but you shouldn't delude yourself. There's so many endless problems. I'm not talking about American society, problems for a Jew in this society. And I'm not talking about the material issues. I'm talking about where we stand. How secure are we? So you say, thank God we have a state of Israel. You can have a state of Israel from today forever. That state is only secure if you read since 48 till today, Israel's existence state is miraculous. You go back to the founding of the state, how it was founded, surrounded by endless armies, Arab armies, and yet they fought, they established. Then you had 56, the Sinai campaign, miraculous. Then you had the 6-Day War, miraculous. These are miracles. Nobody denies it. It's like we're talking about the David and the Goliath. Minimally that. It's miracles. And even now it's miracles. What they want to do to us, the world wants to devour the European Union. The level, the way they evaluate Israel's worse than apartheid. In South Africa, worse. The way they label Israel, Europe is anti-Semitic. It's known. But yet, thank God, with whatever happens, shootings, we're still intact. But it's all miracle. And you have to realize it has nothing to do with us. It's miraculous. So, and that's the reality. So why do we survive? Because God wants you to get it. It's because you're a Jew. Not because you have a superior intelligence. It's because you're a Jew. And God gave a promise that Jewish people are an eternal people. Because someday Jews are coming back. As much as they think they're not coming back, they're coming back. I heard something recently from somebody who are very close with here in Brooklyn, great Talmud Chacham. It's about 10 years older than I am. I never saw this in writing, but he said from the Chofetz Chaim, the Chofetz Chaim said that in the world, when Mashiach comes, there are 140 million Jews in the world. 140 million Jews. Where are they? There are many Jews in existence where they don't realize they're Jewish. We know, according to Judaism, the maternal line determines whether you're a Jew. Many Jews, even the mothers don't realize they're Jewish, but the children they have are Jewish children. I saw a video on Tisha B'Av. There was this girl, and Chabad had a camp somewhere out, I don't know where it was, in North Dakota, one of these places, and they needed counselors for their summer camp. And they put an ad in the paper, and a girl applied, and she was a Christian. And she says, could I work in your camp? It wasn't to teach any, just to be a counselor. So they consulted with the rabbi, and he says, as long as she doesn't speak about her religion to the kids, to the children, it's not a problem. She'd be a counselor. She showed up at work, and she had a Jewish friend, this Christian girl. She must have been about 18, 19. Says, when you come, make sure you have to be clothed. Because Jews are this group of people, you have to be modest. You have to be dressed modestly. And she came dressed modestly, and she wore a crucifix. So the lady around the camp says, you're welcome to come, but you have to take the crucifix off. You can't display your crucifix when you were counseling a Jewish camp. So she was okay. And very often Jewish camps, the bunks that they have, wasn't a sleepaway camp, it's like a day camp. The bunks are named after the tribes, age-wise. The youngest bunk is Ruvain. Second one, Shimon. 12 sons of Yaakov. The patriarchs, the matriarchs. The boys' bunks were named after the patriarchs. The girls' bunks were named after Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. Yeah. And this girl is so touched by this. She can't understand it. She's really getting into it. And she, all of a sudden, she's saying the Shema with these kids. She's a Christian girl. And there's video how she's covering her eyes and she's saying, and she's learning all about Judaism. And she's being touched very strongly. And she can't get it. Doesn't make sense. She goes to her mother and she knew she was adopted. She was an adopted girl. And she learned about Rivka, Rachel, Leah. And he says to Mom, he says, I'm adopted. Do you know who my parents were? See, she says, your mother's name was Rivka and your father's name was Noah. And this is what her adopted parent tells her. She hears that, she freaks out, saying it. If she wouldn't have gone to this camp, Rivka, Rebecca, it had no meaning to her. But now, because she went to this camp and she was touched and she had some inkling of what it's about, you understand? How many such girls are out there, or boys are out there, that maternally, they're of Jewish parentage. They don't even know they're Jewish. When the Mashiach comes and the spirituality of God will resonate in this world, it'll be like magnetic. It'll pull these people out and they're going to realize that they have a Jewish soul. So the Chavetz Chaim, who was divinely inspired, said there are 140 million such Jews in this world. They don't know they're Jewish. And they're not faulted because they never had an opportunity to even know they're Jewish. But today, how does a person understand how to make a decision? It's all based on background. It's based on information. If you don't have information, you have no choice. If your choice is, do you want Buddhism? Do you want Islam? Do you want that? Judaism usually is not part of that equation. It's not part of the spectrum. So the people have choices. They have no choices. I remember when I came to New York close to 40 years ago, and I lived in Baltimore. I was out of touch with certain things. I always knew there was Orthodox, conservative Reform Judaism. I came to New York. I never realized there was such a thing as reconstructive Judaism. Didn't realize it. So I was involved in saying lectures and classes and this and that. I didn't meet a woman. And she says to me, I'm a reconstructive Jew. It was founded by someone named Kaplan. Kaplan originally was part of the conservative movement, and he moved out of conservative, and he started reconstructive Judaism. Kaplan lived till the age of 113. That's how long he lived, Kaplan. So I said to her, why do you have to reconstruct Judaism? I mean, it's not sufficient the way it is. What do you have to reconstruct? You live in a mansion. Everything's modern day, upscale. Now what you're recreating, what do you have to reconstruct it? And that's the question I asked them. You understand? If you don't know what Judaism, then you don't even realize it's reconstructed. There's something perfect. All of a sudden you start tearing it apart. What are you tearing it apart for? Well, I don't think I need this pillar. Before you can do any renovation in the home, you got to get yourself an engineer to know which are the supporting pillars and supporting beams. Because you take out certain beams and pillars, the house comes down. You got to reconstruct. Do you know what originally was to know what reconstruction is? Maybe it's called destruction, not reconstruct.